If any of you have ever watched Simon Sinek's TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action, if you haven't, there's a little bit of homework for you. How Great Leaders Inspire Action. He talks about something that I absolutely love, that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so this morning, I'd just like to start very briefly by explaining why we're here. I think you can all agree that the world is changing at quite a rapid pace, and it's affecting everything, every industry, every country, every society, every form of humanity is having to deal with this rate of change that we've never seen before. And that has an absolute impact on the state of work, the future of the employee, and just us as people. So if I could just talk to you as people today, more than anything, this world is moving, and why we've put together Hot Topics, should I say we, Alexander Forbes has put together Hot Topics, is to discuss these changes, to understand the changes within the industry, to be well prepared for it. Because the truth is, you're either going to be disrupted or you're going to disrupt your own industry. This impacts everything. So Alexander Forbes have put together the Hot Topics. Just by show of hands, any of you come to the previous Hot Topics so that I know who I'm dealing with? Fair bit of you. Awesome. Welcome back. So we're going to be dealing with a range of these topics, and what you'll have is a handful of people I'll be kicking off. We'll have some words from Mercer, who are one of the shareholders within Alexander Forbes, but also their global partner, talking about the changes from their end, more people from Alexander Forbes, and then right at the end of the day, I'll kind of be ending off talking about education. But I want to touch on the future of the world and how things are changing. So I want you to gear up for me because I'm going to give you loads of energy. I'm going to make this easy for you. I want to set a context. Why are we here today? And I'll tell you why. It's my opinion that time is speeding up. Can you feel it? I say that because if you just look in the last 10 years, for example, I would say the frequency of innovation is increasing dramatically, and the gaps between innovation are getting dramatically shorter. I always like to use this example to show my point. This picture on screen represents a time to me that goes back to about 50,000 years ago. So picture life back then in this image. For me, life was two things back in those days, right? First, it was local, because anything that impacted these people in this picture happened within the proximity of about a day's walk. Would you agree? If something happened 200 kilometers away or more, did they know about it? So life was very local, it was contained. And then life was linear, because if you just stop and compare the life of grandparent to grandchild in this image, not much changed from generation to generation. They all ate the same animals, they used the same stone tools, and give or take, they lived in about the same place. So we've got a local and linear setup happening in this picture. But when you fast forward to 2017, we have anything but. Instead of local and linear, we've now moved toward global and exponential. Why global? Because if anything were to happen in the US or China just right now, we would know about it seconds to minutes later. In the old days, we used to ask you to put your phones off. Now we're asking you to please use your phones. So if anything happens in the US or China, we know about it seconds to minutes later, right? Stock prices, news, social media, we know. So we've gone from local to global, and then from linear to exponential, because if I just stop and I compare my life, I'm 33 years old. If I compare my life, how I grew up as a child and how the world worked as a child, and I compare that to the lives of my parents, and then I compare that to the lives of my grandparents, would you agree? These lives look nothing alike anymore. And if I were to have a child today, which is quite a remarkable feat since they normally take about 9 months to download, but if I had one today, right, that child's life would be so much more dramatically different than the previous generations. So, with that in mind, what is creating this speed of change? And it turns out that digitization, the fact that we are starting to digitize the world, is starting to speed up time and change the world irreversibly. And I'll tell you why I say that. In my hands, I have an iPhone 7 Plus. Okay, it's the 10th generation of the iPhone in about 10 years. But if we go all the way back to the first iPhone, this is not 10 times faster than the original iPhone. If you were to hazard a guess, it's over 1,000 times faster than the original iPhone, and going. That's a rate of improvement we call Moore's Law. A guy called Gordon Moore in 1965, who co-founded Intel, simply observed one day that the number of transistors on a circuit board was doubling every 12 to 18 months, and he made this famous statement, and it is likely to continue. And it turns out that over the last almost 60 years, it has indeed continued, the doubling effect. So when something becomes digitized, it starts improving at Moore's Law. or an exponential rate. And second of all, when something digitizes, it starts to converge over with other digital items. Case in point, again, using my iPhone as a simple example, 30 years ago, this wasn't a single device. This was many separate devices. A separate phone, separate calculator, camera, encyclopedia, record player, map book. Think about what I'm saying to you. The map book was a physical book that from year to year didn't really improve much, right? Linear improvement. It became digitized, and what has happened to it in about the last 10 years? The improvement to mapping has been exponential. So when something becomes digitized, it moves at Moore's law and it converges on top of other exponentially changing items. And you can actually see, right, that the change in pace in time almost directly correlates to the number of devices that are connecting to the internet and then starting to talk to each other. There's a very interesting guy that I follow named Ray Kurzweil, and he did a 10-year study on the rate of innovation, on the rate of exponential change, and he found something fascinating. He found that although Gordon Moore, who co-founded Intel, although he was the first person to observe Moore's law had actually been going back to about the year 1900. And what he found most interesting was the pace and the shape of the innovation going back to about the year 1900. It turns out after 10 years, he found out that whenever you start to digitize a domain, a discipline, an industry, a technology, and it empowers a large enough group of people, there's nothing you can do to stop it. He found it so fascinating that the shape of innovation went back all the way to the year 1900 so steadily. And I'll tell you why it was so fascinating to him. Since the 1900s, we've had wars, we've had recessions, we've had ups and downs in the semiconductor industry. Wouldn't you expect innovation to have much more of a stock market shape to it going back and not so even? Here's the deal. Anytime something becomes digitized, and by virtue of digitization, it empowers a large enough group of people, there is nothing you can do to stop its innovation. Self-driving cars, for example. Does it empower a large enough group of people if we stop driving? Will there be less accidents? Do cars need to pee? Do they drink? Do they get tired after a long day's work? If you take that out of the equation, you make the road safer for the masses, plus the fact that you bring back all the productivity by sitting in the car. I can be known to sometimes sit 3-4 hours in my car in a day driving to and from meetings. What happens if I could get that back? Would that be good? What happens if you could get that time back? What happens if we took out the fatalities? Would that empower a large enough group of people? Well, then there's nothing you can do to stop it. And so here's the deal. As I said to you, time is speeding up according to the number of devices connecting to the internet. It's almost in direct correlation. But here's the thing. Although we're about 30 or 40 years in to the digital revolution, we've only just got started because most of the physical world is yet to be digitized. Your shoes, your clothing, this chair, your bed, cutlery, you could go on and on and on. Most of the physical world is actually yet to be digitized. So the warning I'm trying to give you is that most of the disruption that you feel is still to come. The last 10 years is just getting started. So here's the thing. Human beings don't deal particularly well with this rate of change. And why? Because if you put all of humanity on a graph, if you look at us in the bigger scheme of things, it's only a little drop of water in the ocean, the last 30 or 40 years, that we went from living in a linear environment where things improved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and suddenly in the last 40 years, things are improving at a rate we're very uncomfortable with. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. I often use this example. What's the difference between 30 linear steps, if each step was a meter, and the difference between 30 exponential steps? If I'm 5 linear steps in, and each step is a meter, I'm 5 meters. Again, not a particularly hard one to get right. But if you make it exponential steps, do you know that at the end of 30 steps, instead of having 30 meters in, you're 26 times around the earth, or 1.07 billion meters. We're not good with figuring out the one. We are very good with figuring out the other. But we, for the first time ever, live in this exponentially changing world. And to add to it, people, we have no blueprint, nothing. Because we are the first in line of humanity. The last 30 years are the first people in life that have had to deal with this rate of change. No one before us has ever dealt with it. So unlike all other times in history where we could look back to look forward to see where we're going, you can't do that. The rearview mirror is now broken. Looking back will only tell you how it doesn't work anymore. Does that make sense? Think about it in practical terms. Just to give you a perspective, this is the first ever CPU board on the left. That's what Gordon Moore created in 1958. The shift happened quickly. In 1971, we suddenly went from 2 to 2,300 transistors, about $1 per transistor. In 2012, we moved to 7.1 billion transistors, now suddenly about 1/10 of a cent per transistor. And by the way, guys, that is so 2012. How about another one, hard drives? Look at that puppy on the left, right? If you're a selfie taker, any selfie taker, you would never admit it. It's fine, I'll let it slide. But if you wanted to transport your 3 selfies today, you'd have to have a cargo airplane to transport your hard drive from place to place for a really high price. In 2005, we thought we hit the height of innovation. Think about that. 128 megs fitting on your pinky for a fraction of the cost. Excepting that in 9 years, it improved 1,000-fold. 128 gigs for the same price, still fitting on your pinky. So I want to wake you up, dear conference. I want to wake you up to what's coming. I don't want you to be scared. I simply want to show you what's coming, because we can indeed plan and prep for it. But what it takes is a new thinking. You need to start training your brain to think exponentially, understanding that your brain, up until now, is a linear software running over millions of years of evolution. And suddenly we're told, however you think, stop. You have to think anew. You have to start thinking in 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It takes some time to get there. Just to give you some perspective, this is Gary Kasparov being beaten by, what's the name of it? Deep Blue. Deep Blue was created by IBM. Here's the deal, in very short, we thought this was monumental 20 years ago, right? Can you believe a machine beat the best ever chess player? But all it turns out is that chess is a defined set of laws and rules. Once the computer understands the definitions of the laws and rules, you can't outprocess a machine. You can't even outprocess a calculator. You know, like one of those old school handheld calculators, let alone Deep Blue. And the world remarked, my God, we thought this was light years away. Well, just last year, you had Google's AlphaGo beat the best Go player in the world. Now, just to give you some perspective, Go is the most complicated board game we have in the world. It is played on a 19 by 19 grid, and you don't have to know how it works. All you have to know is you have to capture the other person's pebbles, and there are more ways for a game of Go to play out than there are atoms in the universe. So, in order for Google's AlphaGo to beat Lee Sedol, it couldn't outprocess him, because to process all the moves would take millions of years. So it beat Lee Sedol by outthinking him. That same technology then converged into the health space. I went to Sloan Kettering, an early stage cancer detection facility in New York last year, where they're already using IBM Watson. They feed IBM Watson information like a student. It teaches it how to learn. And already as we speak, IBM Watson in the health space is 70% better at detecting early stage cancer in humans than humans. There is a time coming where a man walks into the room and you're like, get that doctor away from me, I want the machine. They can produce more yield in that container than they can in 5 acres of farm. And what's more crazy is that that poor farmer that's done traditional farming his whole life, he doesn't realize that his competition actually resides in San Francisco with 3 electrical engineers being able to tune the wavelength of light and life. Self-driving cars, we've spoken about it to death. It's coming, there's no question, but it's coming from multiple angles. There's so much pressure being put on the industry. If you follow Tesla and Elon Musk, our greatest South African export, they're starting to ship all Teslas with the auto driving car system already, meaning that when legislation switches on, their software is ready. How about Uber? Uber's simply saying, well, if we take the driver out of the equation, that 200 Rand trip to the airport drops tenfold to around 20 Rand. If we start using 100% renewable energy, that same drops another to about 10 Rand. Why would I own a car at that point in time? And if I don't own a car, if I use it as a service, then what happens to parking garages? What happens to insurance? What happens to... That is coming. What happens if you put wireless charge pads in the road? This is a test track in Germany. The car didn't have to stop for 4 days. That's version 1. How about we just take the car out of the entire equation and we simply introduce the e-hang 184, now being tested in Dubai, driverless, self-moving drones. To power all of this, in my lifetime, solar has improved from a price performance perspective 200-fold. 200 times over it's gotten better. Just in my lifetime. It's now cheaper to create a solar farm by half than a coal plant. Nanotechnology is coming, although you may fret the idea when it's your sister or mom or best friend laying on the table and this tiny little nanobot can go and see what's wrong. You'll probably get over the idea if it's the last hope. You'd probably get over the this is weird feeling. Blockchain technology. How do you own your own house? Well, the bank tells you, the title deed office tells you, but these are centralized items. What happens if they get hacked? Who owns your house then? What happens if we decentralize the ledger, spread it across multiple of millions of computers around the world, making it transparent, fair, and free? Guys, I've run slightly over time, but this is the world that we're moving into. And so I just wanted to give you a brief. I wanted to set a context and a tone, not to scare you, but I think that human beings oftentimes react to the stick more than they react to the inspiration. We've got one of two options, all of us, and this equates to everybody in the room. We can disrupt our own industry, or we can be disrupted. That said, we don't have to get super scared just yet. We've got time, but we've got to start thinking and planning and be proactive from here, instead of waiting to be reactive. Would you agree? With that in mind, I'd like to say thank you for giving me this short time to explain to you. We're going to move on to the extra segments. We really want to set a tone in the first half, and then in the second half after the break, we're going to kind of talk solutions-based. So with that in mind, I'd like to move on to the next segment. Thank you very much for your time.